They say every hacker has an origin story, a moment when the screen becomes more real than the world outside. For Min Jae Park, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in July when the water stopped flowing to his village for the 47th time that year. 47 times in a village of 300 souls, in a country where the government promised balanced national development, but delivered empty cement bags and broken promises. Min Jae was 26 years old, self-taught, brilliant, and completely invisible to the sole elite who mattered. He worked from a converted Mall Hogwan, a village meeting hall built during the Semol Undong movement of the 1970s, when his grandparents had transformed mud roads into pavement with government cement and their own calloused hands. Now that same hall, with its rusted speaker on the roof that once announced community triumphs, had become his digital fortress. But this story isn't about nostalgia, not really. It's about what happens when a man with nothing left to lose discovers he has everything needed to take. Min Jae didn't start as a criminal. He started as a jangin, a master craftsman. When the government water trucks failed to come, he built a solar-powered filtration system from discarded Samsung phone batteries and LG inverter parts. When the mobile network collapsed, he constructed a mesh network from refurbished routers he salvaged from Seoul's e-waste district in Yongsan. When the local school needed computers for the 12 remaining students, he refurbished 30 discarded laptops from a Gangnam corporate upgrade cycle. The village elders called him Cheonjae, the heavenly genius. His grandmother called him my grandson, who refuses to accept that the world has forgotten us. But in July of 2023, Min Jae faced something his ingenuity couldn't engineer away: the redevelopment notice. Daesung Group, one of Korea's mighty chaebol, ranked 14th in the nation, with subsidiaries spanning construction, semiconductors and biotech, had secured development rights for a wellness innovation cluster in Chungcheongbuk province. The project required land, his village's land that had sustained the Park family for 5 generations, that had survived Japanese occupation and the Korean War, that had produced rice when the nation was starving. The compensation offered, 80 million won, enough for a studio apartment in Seoul's outskirts for 2 years. For land that held his ancestors' graves, his grandmother's persimmon trees, his father's unmarked grave. The deadline, 30 days. The notice delivered by a contractor who couldn't even pronounce the village name correctly. Min Jae tried everything legal first. Petitions to the National Assembly representative who had never visited the district. Appeals to the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport that generated form letters in bureaucratic Korean. A viral social media campaign featuring his grandmother's hands holding the last harvest, gaining traction in Seoul's progressive circles until the algorithm, perhaps sensing corporate pressure, quietly buried it. On day 23, with 7 days remaining, Min Jae sat in the Mall Hogwan at 3 a.m., watching the cursor blink on his 3-monitor setup, and made a decision that would either save his village or destroy his life. He would become someone else. The target was selected with surgical precision: Kang Tae-oh, third-generation heir to the Daesung Group empire. 39 years old, net worth 6.8 trillion won, primary holdings, biotech and smart city development, with significant operations in, Min Jae noted the bitter irony, rural revitalization projects across Chungcheong province. Kang had never visited the villages his company's subcontractors displaced, had never seen the Mall Hogwans his bulldozers would demolish, had certainly never watched a grandmother of 83 carry water buckets up a hill because the pipes ran dry. But Kang had something Min Jae needed: Gwanwi authority. Not money, that would be too obvious, too traceable. What Min Jae needed was the ability to sign documents, to issue directives, to redirect resources without triggering the chaebol's internal fraud algorithms. He needed to wear Kang's digital skin long enough to make the redevelopment disappear. The hack itself took 11 months to plan and 11 minutes to execute. Min Jae began with Kang's weakest link, a personal secretary named Ji-un, who posted Pilates selfies with geotags on Instagram, used the same password for her fitness app and her corporate email, and, most critically, had administrative access to Kang's digital calendar and document approval systems through Daesung's outdated family office infrastructure. Saho Gonghak, they call it, social engineering, the human vulnerability in every security system. From Ji-un, Min-jae pivoted to Kang's email. From email to cloud storage. From cloud storage to the Holy Grail. Kang's Jeonja Seomyong certificate, secured with a hardware token that, thanks to Ji-un's helpful habit of photographing important work things for her executive lifestyle blog, Min-jae knew was kept in a specific drawer in Kang's Hanam-dong penthouse office. But the certificate alone wasn't enough. Kang's most sensitive transactions required Seingchae In-jung, biometric verification voice print. Facial recognition. Min-jae had prepared for this. For 6 months, he had trained a deepfake model on thousands of hours of Kang's public appearances, earnings calls, university commencement speeches, a disastrous YouTube interview about disrupting aging, where he had promoted his company's biotech ventures. The model could replicate Kang's voice with 97% accuracy. The facial synthesis required only a photograph and a smartphone camera. The technology wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It only needed to work once. On day 27, with 72 hours until the eviction, Min-jae initiated the operation. At 9:47 a.m. Seoul time, a call came into the Daesung Group legal department. The voice was Kang's, slightly distorted, attributed to a poor connection in his Singapore hotel. The face, visible on video, was Kang's, slightly lagged, attributed to hotel Wi-Fi congestion. The instruction was simple. I've reviewed the Chungcheongbuk project. We're withdrawing from the wellness cluster development, effective immediately. Draft the termination documents and send them to my secure folder for Inga Seo-myung. The legal director hesitated. Chairman Nim, this is a 340 billion won commitment. The board of directors, the board answers to me. The voice interrupted with exactly Kang's impatient Seoul aristocrat cadence. And I'm answering to something larger than quarterly returns. Send the documents, Barojigam. They sent the documents. The termination of the Chungcheongbuk Wellness Innovation Cluster was announced the following morning. In the village, there was confusion, then cautious celebration. The eviction deadline passed. The bulldozers never came. The construction equipment was diverted to a site near Daejeon, 300 kilometers away. Min-jae watched from the mall, Hogwan saying nothing. His grandmother brought him doenjangguk he didn't eat. The village elders asked if he had done something, and he smiled and said, "The Seonbi spirit provides." But in Seoul, Kang Tae-oh was not celebrating. He discovered the breach during a routine audit. One of his holding companies had unilaterally abandoned a flagship project. The financial loss was significant. The reputational damage among investors who valued Kukja-shik consistency of vision was potentially catastrophic. Worse, Kang couldn't explain it. The digital trail was immaculate. The voice recordings matched his own. The video verification showed his face. Either he had issued these instructions during a blackout, an unacceptable possibility for a man his age, or someone had become him more completely than identity theft should allow. Kang hired 3 cybersecurity firms, then a 4th. They found traces, sophisticated, professional, almost Han in their artistic construction, but no perpetrator. The attack had originated from a dozen countries, routed through infrastructure that no longer existed, paid for with cryptocurrency mined on compromised university servers in Seoul and Busan. The only anomaly, a single reference in a document draft to Josangwi Tang, ancestral land rights, a phrase Kang had never used, would never use, that reeked of something personal, something Han-filled, something human in an otherwise mechanical crime. Kang became obsessed, not with recovering the money, he had trillions more. Not with prosecuting the crime, he didn't know who to prosecute. He became obsessed with understanding Wei. Why him? Why this project? What had he touched? What machine had he set in motion that would generate this specific, targeted, almost elegant retaliation? Meanwhile, Minjai was discovering that victory has a cost he hadn't calculated. The village was safe, that was true, but safety had created new problems. Without the redevelopment project, the promised infrastructure, paved roads, a real clinic, high-speed internet would never come. The water still failed. The young people still left for Seoul, for Daejeon, for anywhere but here. The Mall Hogwan remained, but its speaker announced only silence. Minjae had won a battle and preserved a status quo that was itself a slow defeat. More disturbing, he had tasted Gwanryuk real power. The ability to reach across the Hangang, to manipulate systems designed to be unmanipulable, to become, in those 11 minutes, more consequential than he had been in 26 years of existence. He found himself researching other projects, other evictions, other chaebol heirs. He told himself he was being careful, building contingency, preparing for the next threat. He knew, in the part of himself he kept locked even from his own awareness, that he was planning to do it again. It ended, if anything truly ends, 8 months later. Kang, through a combination of obsessive investigation and expensive intuition, had narrowed his search to Chungcheongbuk province, and to the villages his company had targeted. To someone with technical skills and personal motivation, the Josangwi Tang phrase had led him to environmental petitions, to social media campaigns, to a name that appeared in the metadata of a viral video before it was scrubbed. Park Min-jae, Cheon-jae of the Forgotten Village. Kang didn't contact authorities, not immediately. Something in him, perhaps the same something that had made him a chaebol heir, perhaps the same something that had made him target rural land in the first place, wanted to understand his adversary directly. He arranged to be in Daejeon on business. He hired private investigators. He found the Mall Hogwan, the solar panels, the mesh network. He found Minjai's grandmother, and through her, without her knowledge, he found Minjai. The meeting took place on neutral ground, a hotel conference room in Cheongju, paid for in cash, reserved under a false name. Kang arrived first. Minjae came 20 minutes late, deliberately, performatively, still maintaining the illusion of control. They were almost the same height, similar builds, both with the mixed features of Korea's complicated class history, Kang with the polished grooming of Seoul privilege, Minjai with the weathered hands of rural survival. They could have been distant relations. In a different Korea, they might have been friends. "You cost me 340 billion won, Kang said. No anger assessment. "You were going to cost 300 people their home," Minjai replied. "Their jogbo, their future. And you decided to play God." "I decided to play you." Minjai smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You were easier to become than I expected. All that money, all that yoksa, and your security was a Pilates selfie and a woman who trusted too easily." Kang studied him. "You could have stolen the money." "You didn't. You could have exposed me publicly." "You didn't. You only wanted the project stopped." "Why?" "Because money wouldn't have saved them. Exposure wouldn't have saved them. Only your Seongyum could do that. Your authority. Your implicit promise that the system would listen. And now..." Minjai's expression flickered, something Kang would later describe as the moment I realized he was more dangerous than I thought. "Now I know it works," Minjai said. "Now I know what I can do, what I should do." Kang had prepared for this conversation in multiple versions. In some, he threatened prosecution, destruction, the full weight of Daesung Group's resources against this village, this family, this life. In others, he offered employment, channeling that brilliance into legitimate channels with appropriate Guisok supervision. He found himself considering something else entirely. "You think you've beaten the system," Kang said slowly. "You haven't. You've beaten my system. A system I inherited to serve my family's interests. But there are larger systems, chaebol networks, government ministries, Jonggyong-Yu-Chak connections, that make me look like a minor player. Systems that would have crushed your village without a thought, that would crush it still if they turned their attention here." Minjai said nothing. You became me to save 300 people. Admirable, but temporary. The next threat won't need my signature. The next threat will come with police, or with lawyers, or with the slow erosion of a world that has no place for villages like this. I can teach you, Kang said, not to be a thief, to be effective. To build systems instead of exploiting them. To protect your village not through deception, but through making it so valuable to the people who would destroy them, that destruction becomes unthinkable. Why would you help me? Because you beat me. Kang's laugh was genuine, surprised. Because in 20 years of chaebol education, you're the only person who's made me feel seen. And because... He paused. I think you might be the only person who can teach me something in return. But what all this yoksa is actually for? They made an arrangement. Unprecedented, probably unwise. Definitely illegal in at least 4 jurisdictions. Minjai would not be prosecuted. Kang would quietly fund infrastructure for the village. Real infrastructure, with real accountability, through channels that would take years to establish. In exchange, Minjai would work with Daesung Group's security teams, helping them understand vulnerabilities they hadn't imagined, while learning the architecture of legitimate Gwonryok. It was not a happy ending. Happy endings require endings, and this was only a beginning. Minjai's grandmother passed 6 months later, never knowing what her grandson had done, only that Mwonga Dalajotda. Something had changed. The water system Minjai built was finally connected to a municipal grid, imperfect, political, but functional. Young people began returning to the village, drawn by new opportunities, new contradictions, a future that looked different from the past. And Minjai discovered that Kang had been right about larger systems. He discovered that the skills that allowed him to steal one identity could be scaled, that networks of chaebol cross-shareholding, of political influence, of technological control could be mapped and potentially redirected. He discovered that his teacher had secrets of his own, that Daesung Group's empire was built on foundations more compromised than anyone knew, that the man who had offered mentorship was himself being hunted by forces he had never named. But that's a story for another time. The story of how Park Minjae, the Cheonjae of the forgotten village, learned that saving one mall was only the first move in a game that would span chaebol boardrooms and presidential offices. The story of how he discovered that the most dangerous hack isn't stealing an identity, it's deciding who you want to become. They say every hacker has an origin story. Park Minjae's was just the prologue.